25,000 years later and pay to get over to see them and go in the caves, and no one's asked for a refund because what is beautiful stays beautiful. And we hope after the reading of this little book I wrote called Offbeat Collaborating with Kerouac, you will join in on Zoom and be part of the whole picture because that's what it's all about. And for all my friends, in the second half, I will play the shofar to explain that while in Yom Kippur we play that everyone is welcome. And for all of you, Shana Tova, L'chaim, and Chag Sameach, which means get down with the get down and have a good time because you're welcome on this new year. This last week we talked about meeting Kerouac and doing an amazing spontaneous public jazz poetry reading. And as a result, we were asked to do an actual one where they sort of announced it. So this is describing that wonderful night way back in 1957. When Jack was in town and now suddenly available, someone from the Circle in the Square Theater thought it would be a good idea to throw together a Friday night midnight show. The village is so packed with school kids on a vacation and people recovering from Christmas that there should be a good turnout just for people walking by, said the woman who worked in the box office. We'll let everybody in for free and see if we can start a series. Your type of crowd stays up all night hanging out. Anyway, I'd love to see it myself. I hear you're both fantastic
Oh, is this as loud as I get?
when you work together. You'll never know what's happening until it happens, I said, but sometimes it does happen, and it's different every time. I'll notify our lighting designer, she said. He's very creative, and he's a fan of you both. Friday, December 27th, 1957, we performed our first midnight show at the Circle in the Square Theater. Since Jack's engagement at the Vanguard had been terminated, he was free. Now that you've got 2 days off, Jack, it's time to come out of retirement and make your big comeback, I said. Someone at Circle in the Square printed up a stack of black and white flyers at the last minute. Even with no announcements, the theater was packed just through word of mouth and the distribution of hand-by flyers of all our favorite village haunts. Philip Lamantia was back in town from San Francisco for a few days, and Howard Hart was raring to go. I took off from my nighttime job at the post office, and the jazz poetry trio was ready for anything. At about 11:30 p.m., we all ambled into the lobby of the Circle in the Square and then hung out in front of the theater, talking to old friends and inviting anyone who passed by to come out of the cold and join us for this free event. The woman at the box office told us she planned to have more midnight readings with us after the first of the year. Look at all these people, she said to Howard, Philip, Jack, and I, joined now by other friends and strangers as we continued handing out flyers to bemused curiosity seekers who stumbled into the theater through the snow. I still have a copy of the original flyer from that night. Over the last 40 years, copies of that flyer have been circulated around the world. We had no idea that what we did that night would have the effect that it did. We were just having fun and trying to undo the unhappy experience Jack had suffered when he was at the Vanguard. Because the Vanguard engagement had been such a disaster, no press came to our midnight show, and they missed an unforgettable evening. At about 12:30 a.m., one of the ushers came out in front of the theater where we're all still standing around talking, joking, and continuing to greet passerbys. The theater was now packed. Gentlemen, may we begin? she said pointedly. It's showtime, shouted Howard Hart. Let's hit it. We all walked to the center of the stage and started our totally unrehearsed and improvised program. The circle and the square lighting designer improvised with us throughout the night. I told him as we were walking into the theater he must forget about his precious experiences as a lighting designer and make himself part of the band. Well, on those lights, said Jack. Be like Picasso playing a bass solo. What words and music, they'll tell you what to do. You'll feel it. We'll follow you and you follow us and we'll all follow each other and we can't go wrong. That concludes our rehearsal, said Jack. I'm ready, said the lighting designer. Fire away. I'm ready to play my axe. A minute later, the theater went pitch black, and all kinds of strange colors came from different angles, fading and blinking like a Technicolor horror movie. I started playing the piano to set the tone for whatever the evening might turn out to be, and the lighting designer suddenly got a demonic grim. He seemed in a trance as he pushed and pulled every dimmer switch and lever on his mixing board, like a new millennium DJ showing off his scratching technique at a hip-hop party. This incredible display was 10 years before so-called psychedelic lighting came into existence. He must have utilized everything in his lifetime of experience in the theater, flashing all the different colored lights, dimming and brightening every lamp at different angles and tempos, blinking and pulsating, contrasting different hues, creating constant blackouts, and even beaming lights in the audience's faces from time to time, all synchronized to the rhythms of the poetry and the music. At one point, he cut out all the lights and focused what looked like a searchlight right at Jack's head, making Jack bend over and shield his whole face like a deer caught in the headlights of an 18-wheeler. Then Jack, seemingly nonplussed, made up a whole rap about driving down a dark two-lane highway in the Black Hills of South Dakota and being blinded by a speeding trucker who was bearing down relentlessly in the wrong lane, trying to get home early to make his new bride on their farm in North Carolina happy. Meanwhile, the lights changed to make the theater resemble the inside of a planetarium. The designer added one small light projected against the Aurora Borealis tableau, and with his left hand making shadows of different kinds of animals and birds in flight, all in tempo with the music. When Jack Howard and Philip disappeared after intermission, squinting to regain their eyesight as well as their composure, they decided to celebrate their succès d'estime. They continued reading their poems to anyone who happened to be in nearby Sheridan Square Park, fortified with Thunderbird wine. When the perplexed usher told me we had to resume, even though the whole theater went on the street outside and it had all turned into a good-natured block party, I obliged by going on stage to play the piano and make up rhymed scat songs based on suggestions from the audience to fill up time until Jack and the poets returned from their wine-tasting experience. Suddenly, it seemed overnight jazz poetry was the new hot thing, and that was the last thing we ever had in mind. We weren't trying to franchise ourselves or our work or to be trendsetters. We both had our life's work. Jack had his books to write, and I had my music to compose. When we worked together, aside from the fun we had, we shared an interest in finding new ways of combining the spoken word with music without any preconceived formulas. We worked together with mutual respect and understanding of the jazz tradition. Always listen, always follow one another, and always go with what the moment tells you to do. We didn't stay exclusively in the idioms of many of the worlds of jazz. My music and Jack's reading and his even occasional singing of the words were done differently each time. The style of music depended on the feelings of the moment. It always came out right. It was something we did together for the joy of doing it. Our message was for everyone present to celebrate that passing moment in time. In the beginning of March 1958, Howard, Philip, Jack, and I, along with Joyce Johnson and a group of merry-making friends, went to Brooklyn College, where Jack was supposed to talk about On the Road and the literary influences of his work. He decided to bring us along to give him moral support. The bottles of Thunderbird started appearing on the subway, and by the time we got out to Brooklyn College, an hour behind schedule, all of us were quite torn up. Jack was one of the shyest people in the world that I'd ever met in my whole life when he was sober. Because he had struggled so long before he'd been discovered as a writer, his overwhelming success and the sudden pressures were more than he could handle. When he was around a lot of people he didn't know, the only way he could face them was by drinking. Still, he always maintained his sweetness and kindness. As we lurched into Boylan Hall at Brooklyn College, the students looked astonished at the sight of us. The English professor, though, was very cool. He introduced Jack, who told a few stories and anecdotes, and then said that in the tradition of the Zen masters, he would let the students ask questions. When someone asked a long, involved question about whether or not Stendhal or Proust was more of an influence on his work and whether or not Celine influenced him stylistically in any way, Jack said, "You've got the answer in your question, and it's a beautiful answer." The students were enraged. He was putting everyone on in a way, but in another way, he was trying to show them that the writer says it all in his writing, and for him to answer the question academically would be dishonest. The students grew increasingly hostile. They wanted to be told something definite. One student got up and he said, "How come I love your books and the characters in your books, and I hate you?" "You don't hate me," said Jack. "You love me, and I love you." It went on like this, and the rumbling and the confusion grew more intense until finally a cute little fellow with a Harpo Marx curly hair, bright blue eyes, and an insane leprechaun smile raised his hand and stood up. "Jack," he said, "when you take those trips out in the country, hitchhiking, walking, bicycling, sleeping out in the fields all night, traveling on freighters to foreign countries, and when you go to Mexico and out in the desert, doesn't your mother ever get worried?" Everybody in the place cracked up. He brought down the house with his questions, and good vibrations were restored. After that, Philip began reading some of his poetry. Howard read poetry, and Jack read some poetry. I played the horn, and what started out as chaos became very beautiful. The students loved it. The English professor was happy because although this was not what he had expected, he wanted to show his class that writers and artists were real human beings. Some of the students, including the young guy who had asked Jack about his mother, stayed afterwards. He introduced himself as Lenny Gross, an aspiring writer. He and some other students invited us out. We stayed up most of the night partying and ended up in Manhattan. It was the greatest group of students I'd ever met, and it made me feel that I was back in school again, except the kids were much hipper than the kids that I had known. On March 22nd, Jack and I did our final Midnight Circle in the Square performance. We could have easily exploited what had now become a fad, but that was the last thing we were interested in doing. We were now searching for new ways of collaborating. We continued to play together anywhere and everywhere. The spirit moved us, but we all felt that we wanted to do something that would also utilize our classical backgrounds. We somehow sensed that this would happen naturally as long as we didn't allow ourselves to be devoured by the beatnik ogre. that had arrived like Godzilla to stomp us all out in a mashed mound of mediocrity. We vowed never to forget who we were or to follow ourselves to become the imbeciles this new consumer fad told us we should become. I want to be Lamont Cranston again, said Jack, the invisible man. Thank God I found a place here close by in Newport, New York. New York is killing me, even though I love it. I need peace and quiet to write. I'm a writer, Davy, not a performing seal. Jack was moving with his mother to Northport, Long Island, and we knew that we could continue to stay in touch whenever he would make his forays into the city. A Night of Poetry in the Bowery, Chapter 2. Davy, check out the stars in the few feet of sky visible in the oh-so-naked eye here in old Manhattanos, said Jack. It was a clear night, and you could see a few stars poking through the mucky carbon monoxide-filled air of downtown New York. We were walking down 8th Street with Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso, checking out old friends, rapping with strangers, and hanging out in the style that was still the major source of Saturday night entertainment for most downtown New Yorkers during the twilight of the 50s. I just checked out a few feet of sky, I said to Jack. I pointed down to the glistening asphalt strewn with candy bar wrappers, pizza crusts, cigarette butts, shreds of discarded newspapers, half-eaten souvlaki's being eyed by an occasional rat, and various fast food meals upchucked by passing revelers. Now I'm checking out the diamonds in the sidewalk that you always talk about, I said, stepping over the remains of a falafel and pita sandwich. Check out that chick, said Gregory in a raspy voice, ogling a tall young brunette with a drop-dead figure wearing a plaid skirt, bobby socks, and penny loafers. She was furiously chewing bubble gum while adjusting her pigtails. She's an old lover of mine, said Allen Ginsberg, giving Gregory a stern look. What? Said Gregory incredulously. You don't dig chicks. What are you trying to lay on us, Allen? You don't go near broads unless it's a business matter. I never said I did, Gregory, said Allen patiently. That chick, as you called her, is a guy, a transvestite. We spent some time together. Well, said Gregory, there goes my night of passion. The night's still young, said Jack. Yeah, said Gregory. But it'll stay young and I'll grow old before I score off them with you guys. All we do is talk and listen to Amram play his horn and BS with every stranger that walks up to us and talks to us, and then Jack takes out his rap and it's 5 a.m. and poor Gregory goes home all alone. Well, Gregory, said Allen, let's go to my place for another night of music, tea drinking, meditating, wine sipping, and poetry rap exchanges. All right, said Gregory. Maybe we'll meet some fantastic young Lower East Side beauty on the way. We walked towards Allen's house. Allen and Gregory started arguing about the great English poet William Blake, with Gregory screaming at Allen and then laughing slyly when startled passersby stared at him. Hey, Dave! Jack, did you see that guy? I thought I was going to kill Allen. He thought I was going to kill Allen. All I was doing was talking about syntax and imagery. Gregory loved to put people on and continued his routine as we ambled slowly along, stopping to talk to anybody and everybody and enjoying a Saturday night of aimlessly wandering down the street. Jack was now more famous, but with Gregory carrying on with his street theater antics, he was able to slouch down with the collar of his lumber jacket turned up, his baseball hat pulled down, and do what he enjoyed doing the most, observing and blending in with everybody else. Gregory, at this point, had drawn a crowd of people who thought that they were going to witness a fight as he continued shouting at Allen. Hit him, said a husky young high school-age kid with a crew cut. wearing a Tenafly, New Jersey high school football jacket. I'm going to hit him with the truth, shouted Gregory. How many of you kids know who Blake is? What team does he play for? Asked the kid with the Tenafly high school jacket. He plays for the great poets, said Gregory. I never heard of the great poets, said the kid. Are they in the Big Ten? Yes, they are, said Gregory. They're football immortals. Ask my friend Jack here. He played for Columbia University. I've heard of Columbia, said the kid, his eyes brightening. What position did you play, Jack? I was in the backfield, but I broke my leg, and that ended it for me, said Jack, looking morose. I loved the game more than it loved me. What do you do now? Asked the kid. I try to stop my friends from killing each other, said Jack. Gregory, Allen, stop it. Let's go. We're almost at the Bowery. The kid walked off, and Gregory continued shouting at Allen. Jack and I were a few paces ahead, walking in silence. Jack gave me a motion with his hand, as he did when we performed together, and I knew he wanted to convey a message. It was an upward flipping of the thumb and fingers, as if you were shooing a fly from the top of your hand, and it usually meant to check out something in silence. Jack motioned with his eyes towards the little bag he had with him and took out a small notebook. And when we passed a bright street lamp, he showed me some sketches he had made and some watercolors. One of them was a picture of a red brick building rising above a waterfall. That's beautiful, man, I said. That's my homage to Lowell, said Jack. I still see those falls in my dreams and my mind's eye. Dodie Muller is my mentor, along with Matisse, Renoir, Picasso, and Tintoretto. But she's mad at me again. I'm not sure I'll keep these, but maybe I will. I might scotch tape them on some gloomy Bowery wall, like Walt Whitman and Johnny Appleseed, sowing seeds for future generations and sitting back in their rocking chairs as old men and watching someone discover them when they become inspired. They call that littering, said Gregory. Save 'em, Jack. Save everything. You picked Burroughs' smacked out scribbles off the floor and made a book out of them. Then he got a devilish gleam in his eye. Do the same with your artwork. You could have a show, man, and get all the rich people who put you down to dress up and come to your art opening. There'd be food, drink, and all kinds of women falling all over you, the way it was when On the Road came out. You'd be a star again. The celebrity shot. Jack Kerouac returns on canvas. Nah, said Jack, looking hurt. Gregory, Allen, and I started laughing. His face clouded, and we saw in his eyes the pain receiving in a flash the incredible overnight success that so quickly turned into critical savaging. I don't need success. I just need people to read my books. I'm an author, Davy. I paint and draw for Jesus and my own satisfaction. Well, Jesus wouldn't have been adverse to you making some money, said Allen. I can get you an art dealer. I know art patrons, big money, yearning to be connected and rise above the nouveau riche dilettantes they compete with for attention. You'd be a natural. Poor French-Canadian boy from Lowell, Milltown, comes to New York, is celebrated, then rejected by New York's tastemakers, turns to painting and becomes a star again. Like the painter's Grandma Moses or Horace Pippin, you could be an icon for primitivism, where there's a lot of money. Allen, said Jack, I never wrote or painted, sketched or drew, read in public, or did anything other than heartbreak day jobs for money. I wrote and do artwork for the love of bearing witness and telling stories in any medium to share my story. And becomes it's a star. St. Francis shot, said Gregory. Yes, said Allen, but never overlook the commercial potential of what you do. You can't sell Buddha, Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, or the American Indian's great creator, said Jack. I put up a sign on this red building. Right now, Jack, said Gregory, spirituality is not for sale in this neighborhood. It's all for sale, said Allen sternly. The capitalistic system guarantees a price on everyone's head. If you lived in Russia, you would have been eating whatever scraps of garbage you could dig up and clearing out the latrines in Siberia for the last 20 years, said Jack. Capitalism and materialism are two different things. Well, the more capital you have, the more material you can buy, said Gregory. Who's got $2 to get a hit of wine, pot, speed, smack, or mescaline from anybody? Give me the $2, said a voice from the sidewalk. Huddled up with his knees drawn to his chest, a middle-aged black man was sipping on the remains of a bottle of Thunderbird wine. Ah, Thunderbird wine, the drink of all sainted poets, said Jack, his face brightening. Quel bouquet, quel goût. You want a hit? Said the huddled-up man, handing the nearby empty flask to Jack. Merci, mon frère, said Jack, slowly leaning forwards and gently taking the bottle, as if to show the man he appreciated his gesture in sharing the last few ounces of relief from the pain and loneliness of the world. Jack drained the remains, wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his ever-present red and black lumberjack shirt, and gently returned the empty bottle to the man's side, as if he were at a dinner table in someone's home. That was perfection, said Jack. Let's get some more. All right, said the man, slowly rising to his feet. I'm Buddy. They call me Buddy the Wino down here. But I'm no wino. I just like to get high, you dig? Wino gets juiced 25 hours a day until he drops dead. I like to get high so I can get used to those deep feelings. You know where I'm coming from? You boys dig what I'm saying? I like to get my head straight. I'm a dreamer and a player, not a juice head. Me too, said Gregory. I'm a poet looking for nirvana. Where can we buy something to get our heads all messed up? Who's got $5? Said Buddy the Wino. There was a pause. We all thought about how to get some remaining money from your pocket, feeling with the tips of your fingers to make sure you left some in there in order to get home safely in case the panhandler turns out to be a mugger. Alan, Jack, and I got $5 in single bills and change and gave it to Buddy. I got to speak to my distributor, said Buddy. Hey, Rocco, he shouted through cup hands. On the way, Buddy, answered a gravelly voice. Around the corner of the building appeared a familiar face. It was Rocco, the pot salesman and U.S. Army dropout, who had lived in the New York streets for over 20 years and survived by panhandling, selling weed, and working odd jobs. He was a good buddy of my first composition teacher, Charles Mills, who was also a friend and a drinking buddy of Jack and all of us. Ah, said Rocco. Gregory, Jack, and Alan, the three musketeers, and Amram, the music man. Would you boys like to trudge into any nefarious substances? How about some Thunderbird, Rocco, said Jack. Excellent choice, said Rocco in a stentorian maitre d' voice. We're having a sale right now. This particular bottle of fine wine is an excellent year, just manufactured a month ago, and better for the heart and liver than drinking sterno or rubbing alcohol or orange juice. If you're sleeping on the street, the combination of a bottle like this and wrapping yourself in the Sunday edition of the New York Times guarantees a good night's sleep. Of course, you boys would most likely want to take the book review section out and save that for your erudition rather than your insulation. Very funny, Rocco, said Gregory. Cut the crap and get us some wine. I have it right here in my wine cellar, said Rocco. He lifted a steel trapdoor from the sidewalk, used for entering the basement of buildings, rummaged around, and emerged with two bottles. One was full, and one was half empty. I use the half empty one here for quality control, but I'll throw it in as part of the special sale and we'll all drink on the way to Alan's house. Who said we're going to my house? Said Alan. Where else? Said Rocco. Mind if I come along? Do I have a choice? Asked Alan. I knew I was welcome, said Rocco. Come on, buddy. Hang out with some of these young cats. Boys, I'm glad to see all of your bad reviews and recent put-downs in the press having you driven all to despair or departure. We need you all here in New York. I want a hip buddy to the vegetarian underground intelligentsia in action. I was too young to ever meet Edna St. Vincent Millay, Edgar Allan Poe, O. Henry, Eugene O'Neill, and all the other heavy cats and kitties that were around the village. After I quit my day job and started living in the streets, the only way I could get close to the happenings was to hang out in Washington Square Park in the summer and outside the jazz clubs and bring your own bottle parties at painters' lofts. I got to meet some great heads, but Jack, after On the Road came out, it messed things up for everybody. Things will never be the same. Suddenly, there was money to be made from being a beatnik, and everything changed. Everybody turned cold. The only ones left to hang out with are you guys and the jazz musicians, the painters and moving men, waitresses and bartenders that still care about being real. The pain of crushed idealism and lost youth, said Gregory. You're breaking my heart, Rocco. Let's drink that wine, score some dope, and you'll get over it right away. I have a leftover sample packed from my weekend special, said Rocco, drawing up a rolled, grease-stained brown paper bag full of Mexican weed from his raggedy coat. We'll roll up a few Mexican joints here, bombers, and have a reunion when we get to Alan's place. Now you're talking, said Gregory. Now all we need is a few broads. We trudged up the stairs to Alan's apartment and all sat down where we could clear space, passed around the wine, all drinking it from the bottle except for Gregory, who insisted on pouring his share into a small saucepan and drinking it while holding up his pinky finger as if he were at a tea party. We trudged up the stairs to Alan's apartment and all sat down. Wherever we could hear, by clearing space, we passed around the wine, all drinking it from the bottle. Elegance is wherever you decide it should be, said Gregory, slurping his wine from the saucepan, his voice echoing as he spoke. Any communal performance of my work depends on high decorum. Give me some more wine and pass that joint. Alan stood up and we all quieted down. He looked like an overweight, stoned-out Abe Lincoln without a top hat, and when he spoke, his face became intense and his eyes focused on all of us in two different directions. It was hard to tell if he was angry or off in another world exercising demons. Half of his face was angry, the other somewhat smiling. But when he recited poetry, whether it was his own or someone else's, his voice had a soothing, hypnotic effect on everyone. Alan began to emote like a crazed Hasidic rabbi delivering a sermon. We are gathered here, old comrades in the arts, with our new friend Buddy. That's Buddy the wino, said Buddy, pulling out a huge cigar-sized marijuana joint, wrapped in part of the sports section of the New York Post. There's thousands of Buddies in New York, but only one Buddy the wino, and you're looking at him right now. Yes, I stand corrected, said Alan. Buddy the wino. And don't forget the holy man of Washington Square, Rocco, born and bred in New York, veteran of the 101st Airborne, who chose to reject earthly possessions to live a life on the streets like a Jacobean worker priest to help his brothers and sisters to find salvation in the living hell of New York's cruel Bowery nights, said Jack, finishing off the first bottle of Rocco's special Thunderbird wine at bargain sale prices. There's no place to hang out in the cold weather, said Rocco. All the coffee shops and jazz clubs and old restaurants are booming now. You guys started a trend that's pricing us all out, including yourselves. Where's all your royalties and advances, Jack? Gone, said Jack wearily, fluttering his fingers in the air like a dancer. I got my mother a home, he said proudly. She'll never have to work in a goddamn factory again for the rest of her life. I'm surviving. I'm still writing all the time and painting. And I have some poetry I was going to read. Let's hear it now, said Rocco, passing the second bottle of wine around. Salut, à la santé, l'chaim. Prost. Whatever language this wine tastes so good on a cold winter night, it's like the nectar of the gods. An interesting turn of phrase, said Alan professionally, as he took a tentative sip of the somewhat rancid, half-empty bottle of Thunderbird that we were passing around. I left it open for a few days on the top of the radiator in the stone room of this basement, said Rocco sheepishly. It tastes a little fruity. Read your poem, Jack. I remember when you and Amram did those jazz poetry readings back in 1957. Stirred things up. Now, nobody remembers. It's good we're doing it at my place, said Alan. It's too cold outside, and if Amram doesn't start playing his horn too loudly, we won't have the neighbors call the cops for disturbing the peace. I'd like to begin by reading a love poem. We all quieted down. Gregory took a long last swig from his saucepan full of wine, and Alan began reading. He was developing his style modeled after Jack's, and while at this time in his life he had no natural sense of music or rhythm, which he later developed to a higher level, he had the intensity and amazing voice that made everything he read capture your attention. While he was reading, Buddy the wino would occasionally nod his head in appreciation, while Rocco fought to keep his head from falling into his chest as he began to nod out. Yes, yes, said Gregory when Alan was done. I could definitely dig that, said Rocco, awakening from his semi-slumber. Nice. That was choice, said Buddy. Very tasty, Alan, I said. The voice of Alan is heard in the land, said Jack. Thank you, said Alan. It's nice to read like this, without a mob of people, cameras, tape recorders, and detractors. Read one, Gregory. Nah, said Gregory. You guys are the performers. I've got down on paper. History will judge me, but what I leave on the shelf, I don't need the limelight. I'm a poet. I'm not a songwriter or a movie star. All I need is a refresher for my saucepan. Another joint and a fine woman, which I'll never find hanging out with you guys. I have a date at the San Remo with a beautiful waitress from the Kettle of Fish at 10:30, so I'm splitting after Jack reads a few more poems. I'll see you at the Cedar Tavern tomorrow night, Dave, and you can meet my new true love if she remembers to show up. She likes classical music, Dave, and she wants to hear some of your symphony pieces. But if you play her anything, remember, she's with me. I know, Gregory, I said. True love knows no bounds, Gregory, said Alan. Caring means sharing. Ah, save that Buddhist crap, Alan, snapped Gregory. If she's with me, she's mine. We don't own each other's souls or bodies, said Alan gently. That's true, said Gregory, but I don't want anybody messing with my romantic attachments. No romance without finance, said Rocco. That's Dizzy Gillespie's famous saying. How about $5 so I can give Gregory a hit of speed to guarantee his sparkling personality to emerge from the debilitating effects of the evening soiree? Nah, said Gregory. One more poem and I'm out of here. Jack stood up and opened up his knapsack. Inside was a roll of paper that looked like a scroll of shelving paper. I noticed that there was typing on it. He began to unroll it like an old Hebrew scroll that you would see in a temple, like the miniature scroll of my great-great-grandfather Moses ben Huda, known as Moses Amram, which he brought with him when he landed at the port of Savannah in the mid-1800s, which was passed on to members of our family through generations. Jack and I used to talk for hours about the sanctity of ancient artifacts, old Jewish documents, the hieroglyphics of Egypt, the Book of the Dead, the 10,000 or 20,000-year-old Lascaux cave paintings, the Easter Island statues, Stonehenge, all the surviving relics of antiquity, and how their presence today, telescope time, made the past present and the present past. I suddenly wondered when I saw Jack scroll if he felt that this was something he was leaving, like a time traveler to the future, or if he had gone back into the past and somehow retrieved it. "You're looking so much stoned out there, Dave," said Rocco, interrupting my thoughts. "Oh, excuse me," I said. "I was just wondering. Jack, tell me what that scroll is." And next week, we're going to hear more of what we did after that. And we have a special guest at that time, the great Bill Morgan, who wrote a wonderful book editing it of Jack's and Alan's letters to one another before people knew who they were, and also many poems and books of his own. And tonight we have a terrific guest whom we've already seen doing his arts work, and he's going to join us a little later on. His name, in case you don't recognize him, is Norton Wisdom, and we're just overjoyed that he could join us and add his creativity. And also, the person who's now going to be bringing you some extraordinary information, thanks to our co-producers, Pamela and Anthony, and I'm going to say his name correctly for the first time, which I have written down, Demerbier. And we also are going to see a video of the person who bought the famous scroll of Jack Kerouac's On the Road for $2.4 million. His name is, of course, James Irsay. And rather than putting it in a vault, which he's entitled to, of course, he paid for it, and keeping it there for 20 years and selling it for 5 times as much as he paid for it, he has had the scroll out for years all over the country so the people everywhere can see and read and be inspired by this extraordinary document of creativity. And the person that he entrusted this valuable piece of history with was our guest tonight. His name is Jim Canary. I was on tour with him in London and in Lowell, Massachusetts, Jack's hometown, in Florida, in Indianapolis, in New York City at the New York Public Library's opening, all kinds of places. And unlike most people in the art world, when they're dealing with a treasure, rather than having a gun, a club, and a hate-filled disposition, he makes every single person who comes up feel welcome, tells them about it, talks to anybody and everybody. And I honestly believe if Jack were with us, which he still is through his writing, he'd be so happy that you will have the chance now to meet and see the video of him in London, and also to hear James Irsay, Mr. James Canary. And accepting the award for James Canary,
I guess I'm on.
who possibly got asphyxiated by my hot air. He's going to speak to you, but before that, they have 2 wonderful videos that Pamela and Anthony arranged, for which we're grateful. And then Jim will speak. And these are are two videos which we have during our, I don't know if intermission is the correct word, but we're going to be able to see Mr. James Irsay himself speak and Jim Canary speak. And then Jim Canary and I will be delighted to join you in a little Sunday night hangoutology. And I guess I should mention, for people who tuned in late, on our night of atonement, this is, I'm fasting, and for all our friends who celebrate the New Year, Shana Tova, and for those who know about it, this is called, this is the shofar, the ram's horn. You only get to play this once a year. So for those of you who want to become a shofar player, remember the career opportunities are very limited, but it's been going on for over 5,000 years. And we welcome everybody of every religion, every faith, every kind of spirituality to feel welcome and to join us. And I just spoke to the great Sonny Rollins today because he had his 90th birthday, September 7th. Mine's November 17th. And we met in 1955. He's always been a friend as well as a mentor of mine. And he mentioned that the Golden Rule is celebrated in every major religion in the world. So since Jack was a devout Catholic and a practicing Buddhist, and so many people have religions, we have to all respect each and every person's faith. And if they're an agnostic and an atheist, we have to respect that too, because we're all here as brothers and sisters, as members of the human race. And that's what Jack was all about. And that's what art is all about, to uplift and to share stories.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David, for that. So yes, really quickly, for the next about 10 to 15 minutes, enjoy the awesome videos that we have coming up.
And all the people dreaming in the immensity of it. In an hour, I know by now that children must be crying in the land where they let the children cry.
I think we're going to start at the beginning here and go as far as we can go. Yeah, it's just under 120 feet. It's only been rolled out the full length twice. Once was at the University of Iowa, and then the other was in Indianapolis for the Super Bowl. He could type over 100 words a minute and didn't want to interrupt his thoughts. Treated the typewriter, I think, very much like the keys on a saxophone. It's a very physical act of typing, and he just launched into it. After, he had all of his notes assembled. He had made several attempts to begin this novel, but when he sat down for those 3 weeks, he was determined to just go through and get it all down. So I think that's just an incredible rush of creative energy, and I think people can kind of feel that sense when they see the scroll.
This is the first time that the scroll has been on display like this in London. So it's really a chance to be able to come and see it, read it, see how the scroll differs from the printed text as well. So it starts off, in fact, with a typo. It starts off, I met Neil, rather than I met Neil. It's almost like a car backfiring, some critics have said. Elsewhere, he's changed the names. He's used pseudonyms. But here are the original names: Allen Ginsberg, Bill Burroughs, and of course Neil Cassidy. And elsewhere, he's taken out places, toned down some of the sexual and homosexual references as well. The final bit of the scroll was also eaten by a dog, so that isn't here on display.
In this, he says, my aunt once said the world would never find peace until men fell at their women's feet and asked for forgiveness. So that's what's in the book. In the scroll, it goes on to say, This is true all over the world. In the jungles of Mexico, in the back streets of Shanghai, in New York cocktail bars, husbands are getting drunk while the women stay home with the babes of the ever-darkening future. If these men stopped the machine and came home and got on their knees and asked for forgiveness, and the women blessed them, peace will suddenly descend on the earth with a great silence, like the inherent silence of the apocalypse. I mean, that's kind of a big thing to not be there, isn't it?
As well as the scroll manuscript, we have a number of books and sound recordings, and also reproductions of photographs and some materials from the Kerouac archive held at the New York Public Library. And here's a map of, done by Kerouac, of one of his trips in winter 1947-48, and you can see how he travels across the north of America and then back. A little aid memoir showing where he stayed. Partly as a personal record, but shows how he relied on journals and reworked and sort of prepared for writing on the road long before and indeed after that 3-week session of typing out the manuscript here. The novel got wrapped up with the idea of the beats and the lifestyle. And I think the young generation really took that on board and became an inspiration for generations to travel and to see the world and live. But more recently, I think critics have also appreciated Kerouac's literary ambition and his talent, the real attention to detail, to structure and to language. And there's a real literary quality, and it really is a modern classic. And I think that is being rediscovered now as well.
Think of Dean Moriarty, I think of Dean Moriarty.
I think that the key thing is that the theme, every young person in this country can relate getting into a car with a friend or two and driving the countryside on a great adventure. So that theme, along with knowing about the beats, really kind of connected me with the book and the scroll. I always say it found me in some ways. I think that's the way I kind of operate. I don't really know what might interest me tomorrow or a year from now or a month from now. But when I found out it was available and I went to see it at the John Hancock building in Chicago, where Christie's had an office, then it changed things a little bit. I was like, wow, this is something really special when I physically saw it. And then I talked to the late Hunter S. Thompson, who was a good friend, and Cameron Crowe, another great writer, and we talked about where does this scroll, where does the body of work of On the Road, where does it fall in American literature, what's its impact, and really from thinking about not only American literature but pop culture, etc. It was really determined this was the holy grail of the beats. The beats, they really came in the 50s after World War II and had the courage really to say and start doing some radical stuff that really kind of was already happening with jazz and folk music and different things. But they really pushed the envelope. It's kind of like when the Sex Pistols came out and blew up disco, so to speak. These guys were kind of blowing up the conservative 50s and had a lot of courage. A lot of times people go back in history and think about the place they're in 2008, and they don't realize what a tough time it was to have that much courage as an artist and those sorts of things. And certainly I think just the love of great writing, but also kind of what the beats stood for, which was being radical. I was always leaning more towards the radical element. When we were kids, we always had the argument, are you in McCartney's side or Lennon's side? Because they were kind of, Paul was more the cute love song writer, and John was the radical. And I was always tied to the radicals. You have an event where the scroll's at, and people choose to gather there to see it, to celebrate, to go with friends. And then something happens magically where there's a connection of people meet people, and that's kind of what life's about. It's kind of creating the moments where it's that shared experience, and really getting around it and enjoying it. Watch movies, listen to songs, see TV shows. It's referenced a lot. It's kind of referenced in the radical art form of freedom, of travel, of great literature, of the romantic notion of being young and free and getting in that car and going. So there's no question that this is a big part of culture, even internationally.
Now, thank you. That was James Irsay, and we're going to hear a wonderful young man whom you saw in the beginning, the conservator of the scroll, with whom I've had the joy of working in London, where they showed him being interviewed, and many other places. And perhaps, since we haven't heard anything from her, the person who thought of all of this and made this possible, Pamela, perhaps could introduce our wonderful guest. And if Pamela is not available, I could do it myself if you wish.
Oh, that's
Anthony, you introduce him, because we've heard enough of me for quite a while. And
Are we muted? I don't know. But David, can you hear me?
no, not yet, but I was reading your lips just like George Bush used to do. Only in case other people couldn't hear it, this is, in case you have just tuned in, Anthony Desmarbier, and he, along with Pamela, are the two people from Eclat who've made this all possible in such a nice, friendly, inviting way. And we're going to have all of you come and speak. But we'll ask again, maybe for take two, Anthony, if you could introduce James. And we wanted to get Pamela to do this, but I guess she's occupied at the moment.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Thank you so much, David. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Really quick, in case you are unaware, you are a part of a little history right now. We are on top of doing a Zoom show and streaming on YouTube Live, recording this for an audiobook, which is going to be published in the future. So this is a little bit of a time capsule that everybody is going to be a part of, and we thank you so much for spending your Sunday night with us. With that said, I would like to introduce the amazing, I believe he is referred to as the wizard in the communities, Mr. Jim Canary, who is from the first video and the keeper of the scroll of Kerouac. Jim, thank you for being with us.
Sure, it's my pleasure, really. I'm glad to be able to share time with David. We've had so many experiences on the road together, and being involved in bringing Jack's scroll to a much wider audience. As David said, I think it's a wonderful thing that Jim Irsay has put the scroll out there for people. His whole idea is to as he said, to put something out there and create an experience, an opportunity for people to have that coming together, which I think is so important. And the thing I really enjoy is that it then puts a burden on whoever's taking the scroll to bring together local poets, musicians, books and things in their collections, put them with the scroll. The scroll draws people in. People then say, oh, I didn't have any idea that these people were here, or these books were in our library, and that sort of thing. So it's an awakening. I feel like whenever I bring the scroll, it's on those two spools. To me, they're like fuel rods in a reactor, and I carefully place them in, we roll it out, and then there's this glowing presence of Jack's creative act there. And I think you can't help but be moved by being in the presence of that scroll. It's so powerful. So again, I'd like to thank Jim for being so open and sharing of that document. I think he really gets that. And has been so good to me, allowing me the privilege of taking care of it. I was hugely influenced by Kerouac. I read it in 1969, the year that Jack died. And then I graduated high school in 71. And as soon as I got out of school, I hitchhiked across the country. For the next 3 summers, I did the same thing. So it had a very strong influence on me. I grew up, my father was a typewriter repairman. So I grew up with typewriters all around me every day. And my father repaired them. So I would go down in the basement and watch him working on these machines, which I thought were just beautiful. And then I loved his toolboxes, and everything was so neat and organized. And I think that's really what got me into my career of being a conservator and restoring, repairing precious books and documents. So I think it really came together in a way that I could never have imagined. And working with Jim and the whole Colts team has been nothing short of wonderful. They're a fabulous group of people to work with, and so generous in every way, and making this available for people to enjoy. And I'm just willing to talk with David about some of our experiences and field any questions that anybody might have. I'm just really here just for you all to ask whatever you'd like.
I remember one thing when we did the program at the New York Public Library, and they were trying to figure out, as great intellectuals, what can you possibly do? And Myra Borshoff, who worked so beautifully with Jim for so many of the things that he did, including when he got the football team and helped that to run as smoothly as everything else that he was involved in his whole life, and made everyone feel at home. She said, I think I know what to do. So she turned the library, rather than having a feeling that you're going into a penitentiary, she made it into a place like it was in the 1950s and today, and many places, little cafes all over the world. And she had Patti Smith come and not only read her poetry, we played some music together, and a lot of wonderful people. And it was the first time I can remember in New York City ever having a so-called beat event, heaven help us, when it wasn't torture. It was just joyous, and it was like what we did and what people do today, and what people have done since the beginning of time, since they made those first Lascaux cave paintings and said, hey, look at this, check this out. We can show our kids what it was like. You felt that creative, warm, communal spirit. And I remember you were at the scroll, and I said to you at the time, I said, man, even the scroll I mentioned in my book was something else that he was writing, because he did that with quite a few pieces. But I remember when I just said how hypnotic that was, and what a feeling. It just, I don't know what it was, something. And you said, well, you felt that way every time, every place we went. And so did other people who saw it and who see it. And that's such a wonderful thing, because you can build statues and skyscrapers, but when you actually see what someone wrote, and in England, when he had his work a few hundred feet from the old King George Library, which was part of the British Library now, one big building. They had the original manuscripts of Beowulf and Chaucer and Shakespeare and Emily Bronte and Dickens and Thackeray and all these killer writers. Jack didn't speak English till he was 6 years old. And he loved the English language and he loved French and he loved all the different languages, but he really adored the English classics. And for his book, Original Scroll, to be right there with the pantheon of great English-speaking writers, I said to the audience before our group was playing, imagine what it would be like for someone who grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, not even speaking English, to have his work right where it belonged as part of a great writing. Because he always used to say in his Lowell accent, I'm an author, Davy. I'm an author. Why don't they read my books? And sure enough, today, 2020 as we speak, his books are being read all over the world. And then when people see that scroll, they even say, man, maybe I can do something in my life besides rotting in front of a TV set. And I want to go out and live too. It functions in so many ways. And the way you take care of it is like a miracle.
Well, it's been an honor to do that. And it's been so great for me to meet all of the people that I've met along the way and to learn so much from all the museums that we've displayed in. I've brought a lot of those ideas back to my work. They inform my daily work. And then we have things that we share with the folks that I've met. It's been really great. I mean, I don't know if Jim realizes how much has been generated in this process, but I think it's been a tremendous exchange of information on many, many levels. Just to give a little bit heads up, it's going to be exhibited, all things considered, if things change a bit in the world. It will be in Kobe, Japan in July of this coming year, 2021. And Matt Theotto, who many of you will know as a beat scholar, has planned a small beat seminar or conference in conjunction with the scroll being there. It will only be on exhibit about a month in Kobe, but I just thought people may be interested. And of course, 2022 would be the 100th anniversary of Jack's birth, and we're hoping to have some very, very great venues for that year. I think it'll be a very exciting year. So I'll keep tuned and see where we may be in 2022. But I really have enjoyed every time we've been together, David. You when you were in Indianapolis and had the opportunity to come down here, that was great. I was only wish that we'd had time to introduce you, have you over at the music school, because there were people there I'm sure you would have loved to have met. Dave Baker was still alive then, which he's passed away, but we want to get you back. So,
well, I'm ready. I know almost everyone in the faculty, and my old horn teacher from way back, Abe Knyaz, taught there for a long, long time, and we had such a good time after being at the Elegant Museum in Indianapolis. It was fantastic. Then we went down to that little place that you invited me to in Bloomington, where your home is and where so many people live, where John Mellencamp, I guess, lives close to there, and so many other great musicians that we know. And I remember we were down there, and that was as exciting as Carnegie Hall or anything else, because it was real and it was warm and it was friendly. And that's what it's all about. And that's our gig in life, to try to bring some of that warmth and inclusiveness and happiness and joy into other people's lives. And that's what Jack did in his books. And that's why people still read his books. And that's why he was able to pass by the albatross around his neck, known as the Beat Generation, gloom, doom. That's all fine. I mean, but he was more than that. He was writing beautiful, beautiful stories and pictures and poems and making films, and what he wrote about his voyages, not just on the road, but all those other books. He was a fantastic cat. And he loved the classics of Europe and Asia and Africa and Native America. And he loved the classics of the English language, and he loved people and the poetry of the streets. He saw it all. He was the one who understood that when people say there's nothing else to write about, there's nothing else to paint, there's nothing else to think about, there's never too many sunsets, and there's never enough beauty. And that our gig in artists is to uplift and to foster creativity in others. And that's what the scroll does. And that's what you're helping to do. And bless James Irsay, for his generosity in making that available for the whole world eventually to see and to know about. That one guy with a typewriter just doing something that he really cared about so much helped to make the world a better place.
Hmm. Yeah, as a Buddhist myself, I'm also very attracted to the Dharma Bums, another one of his works on, which also was done on the scroll. And I remember him sitting under a pine tree, and he would. This is really, I've often used this when I've been confused or unsettled in one way or another. But he would say the name of a friend or someone, and he would bring them up in his mind, and he would say, like, David Amram, equally empty, equally to be loved, equally a coming Buddha. And he would just go through a number of people. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. We're all, as you've said, we are all in this, on the ship together, right? And
Absolutely.
we have to realize that point of commonality among us and not find all these differences. I don't think that's not healthy. It's not good. We need to find our common ground. And that's love, right? And
Absolutely.
understanding.
And that's why, I always remind kids when they say, oh man, I should have been there then. I said, you're in the right time. Charlie Parker said, now is the time. And that's always applied. And when younger people are told, there's never, there's no point in doing this anymore. It's all been done. It's a waste of time. You're too old because you're 24 and your career counselor tells you you're washed up. Well, with all due respect to the brilliant advice, I always say to people, accept that brilliant advice, but hang out with other people. And secondly, if you know that you were put here to do something, then find a way to do it. Whatever you do to pay your rent has no bearing on your value as an artist or a person. And secondly, that what you do can inspire others to do something, and that we're all born with artists' sensibilities. We're all born to be storytellers and painters until we're talked out of it. And each person has a story. Each person that you meet in life can educate you. And one of the beautiful things you do is when people come up to the scroll, instead of the traditional way of saying, get out of my face, which is what we're used to in the East Coast, especially in New York, you bring them in just the way Jack tries to bring in the reader, and you make them feel at home. And that's what we hope this little program can do. And that's why I wrote that book of collaborating with Kerouac, because the second half was all about, after he passed away in 1969, we weren't trying to be the golden Ogleys or have somebody saying, I was there and you weren't, so go shove it, but rather to make people feel welcome and that the spirit was there long before Jack and I were born and goes way, way back. That's why the Lascaux cave paintings are still hip after 20-some thousand years, because they were real and people were up there, just as Norman Wisdom's been doing tonight, telling their story in a certain way, how they felt, and giving us a chance to see a documentation of how other people feel and how other people give their reportage. And that's a terrific thing, and it's very inspiring, and we're grateful Norton could come, and certainly grateful that you could come too, so people could get a chance to see you and James Irsay speak for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I remember that show when you were in Indianapolis. I thought was so wonderful because it was, beautiful all white gallery, and they had 60 feet unrolled. Jim Irsay had a display case made that could display the whole 120 feet. So it's modular and we can adjust it in 12-foot sections. So we did 60. Halfway through the exhibit, I came back and unrolled the second half. So people who really wanted to could read the entire scroll. But on the wall, on that white wall behind it, were all of Robert Frank's photographs of his book that Jack had written the introduction to, The Americans. So that was just, to me, ideal. And then to have you there with the music, it was the whole Pull My Daisy thing coming together, you know?
Well, also that whole part of the country, people forget that what they used to call Naptown. When I was at Camp Breckenridge in 1952, Whitey Harris, great trumpet player who was at 101st Airborne, where I was in basic training, said, "Man, let's go to Naptown. That's where they got the killer musicians." I said, "What's that near?" He said, "Well, it's not far from Lexington, Kentucky." I said, "Naptown, what city?" He said, "That's Indianapolis. We call it Naptown." So I went down to Indiana Avenue. Half a century later, of course, I finally found out that the man who was a great, great composer and theoretician and teacher at your school, Mr. Baker, who wrote the famous 251 book and also wrote In a Mellow Tone, which I heard the New York Philharmonic play and did some programs with him at the Kennedy Center, had been a trombone player and a cellist and was an amazing symphony composer who also wrote about Naptown and Indiana Avenue. And then Dan Wakefield, the great writer who wrote the book New York in the 50s, moved back and
Yeah.
now has a park named after him after being Peck's bad boy and writing a hit book, and people in Naptown said, "Oh, he's disgracing our wonderful city with that racy stuff." Now he's a local hero. And I said, "Thank heavens, Dan, you don't have to worry about having an airport named after you. Your books are out there to be read." And he's is a terrific writer and also a mentor and someone who loves the classics and loves jazz. And his books, like Jack's, have a unique place. And Dan's book about New York in the 50s talks about all of the great writers of the 50s. And if you hung out with Jack, I never heard him put down another writer. He would have spent the time talking about all the people that he read and liked. And that's a terrific thing in an ultra-competitive society where everybody's supposed to be your energy if they get any attention. There was another way of looking at stuff, and all of us, I think, were lucky to be privy to that. So I guess in our way, we try to share that spirit with people coming up and saying, if you think today's a drag, remember, ever since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, the rents have been too high. Men and women have been hassling with each other, and competition, jealousy, and all those things are there, but they don't rule the world. They just take over for a while. And since Gary Lippman told me that one of the philosophies that he studied was that everyone has a dog and a wolf inside them. And you have the choice whether you want to feed the dog inside you or feed the wolf. So it's your decision sometimes to take all those wretched things and say, "Oh, I think I better cool that out because I saw other people that way and it was a drag."
Yeah. Well, we have the library, the Lilly Library where I work, we have all of Dan Wakefield's papers there. It's a voluminous archive of writing. Amazing.
And like Jack, Dan's almost as old as me. I shouldn't say that because I'm only going to be 90. I'm still a work in progress. But anyway, Dan's got his wonderful radio show, and Sophie Fout, the great saxophonist who plays with him, when I was at the Indianapolis Art Museum, the people in her band I had the pleasure of playing with, and they were fantastic. And like so many musicians, also love art, painting, poetry, all kinds of music, and one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we should probably ask some of the people in the Zoom audience. I'm sure they would like to ask you a question.
Sure.
Hello, David. I
there you
figured
are.
out how to unmic myself. I was waiting for Anthony. So my apologies when you're calling to me. I was like, Anthony, but it was on me. So I would like to say welcome to Jim Canary, the wizard. And I had the opportunity to first meet James Canary at the Autry Museum, where the Route 66 exhibition had the scroll. And it was quite a revelation to me, having loved and studied the Beats and Jack Kerouac. And on the last day, when the scroll was the exhibition was over, and I was just shaking, wondering how was I going to handle the scroll being gone, because I'd been going every week a few times and had taken the local French school, the Lycée International, on field trips over there. And I was talking to Jim Farber, who was the conservator of the exhibition. And he said there was someone he wanted me to meet. And all of a sudden, all the way across the way, I see this magical being. And I said, is it that dude? And Jim said, yes, that's the other Jim. So we got 3 Jims: Jim Farber, Jim Canary, and Jim Irsay. And I'm just so happy that we're all here together, and just sending big love to all of you. And thank you for being here.
And thank you, Pamela. And for everybody who's watching, that is Pamela, whose idea was to do this. Otherwise, I might be cursed to be at home watching CNN when I wasn't doing which is fun, I guess. But instead, I'm able to be with all of you, and all of us can be together, and all of us can hear and see these wonderful things. And without you, this never would have happened. So I recommend for anybody, try to hang out with people who you feel have something to offer, and be grateful if someone does have something. And we see Dr. Harrison's name. He's a great, great musician, composer, trombone virtuoso, and he's helped to bring jazz into the mainstream somehow and make people aware, including myself as a Pennsylvania-born person, how important Pittsburgh has been in the history of this music, along with Indiana, along with Naptown, and along with Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., and Detroit, and so many places here in the USA and overseas. And mostly, if we have any education about jazz other than jazz is dead. Dave Lambert in 1966 said, man, they've been saying jazz is dying for the last 60 years. Fortunately, jazz and all beautiful things of art never accepted the Dr. Kevorkianization of their demise. And Mr. Harrison, Dr. Harrison, has a wonderful, wonderful website, so all you folks can study that. If you see that and Jazz on the Tube, you'll get the education that we should have gotten in every school and from every parent. But it's never too late to get informed. So thank you for tuning in again.
Here, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. I finally got my audio together. This has been quite a thrill, both weeks. And boy, I get an education tonight. It was just wonderful. And, I'm fortunate to have had a chance to study directly with some of the progenitors and innovators of our great jazz music, or great I've had a chance to play with some legends from Father Hines to Kenny Clark, Billy Eckstein, Count Basie, and Art Blakey, and be able to directly be taught and mentored and influenced by them. It's been just great, and it's what I got to talk about for the rest of my life, because young people didn't have the opportunity to do that. So I'm trying to debrief myself as often as I can. Thanks to the pandemic, I'm getting a chance to catch up with what I wanted to do years ago. So I'll keep flooding things out there. What my purpose is to just put it out where it won't disappear. I'm so thrilled to see where Jack's scroll has now become a permanent thing, like the cave paintings you mentioned earlier. And it's not about putting it out for money. It's about putting it out so somebody 50 to 100 years from now can discover that there is a truth that didn't get eradicated. So that's my theme for the rest of my time here. And I have so much I've collected a couple of 100,000 photos and 3,000 tapes that I taped live in the clubs through the 60s and 70s. And nobody's heard them but me. So I'm going to make sure that they get out there. I have at least 100 tapes from when I was with Count Basie. I played with Kenny Clark for 6 months. I have tapes from that. And I have tapes of conversations. And I was speaking to a professor at Pitt who's now asking me questions about what it was like when the clubs were open and the after hours clubs and all of that. And I said to him, I've been a voice in the wilderness for 50 years and nobody was interested. And now the people who are interested are coming from the surface of what had been written by people who weren't part of it. And they don't have the questions to ask. And he said, well, boy, you have so much information. I'd like you to call me up and maybe we could start your book on the phone. I said, no, I've been interviewed over the years by numerous people who either misquote me or don't get it right. I said, and I read it back and I said, look what they've done to my song. I said, so from now on, I said, I'm only going to talk to an electronic device so that it'll be unfiltered, so that the way I see it and experience it will get out there without somebody trying to interpret it. So I'm being very inspired by you, David, and all the things that you've done. And I really am grateful that the universe brought us together, because it's fine, like you said earlier, finding like minds. It's about a frequency. And we have the opportunity now to take a thought and send it around the world in seconds. And I said, boy, I was so glad I lived long enough to have that opportunity. And when you send out a quality or frequency, it's like a tuning fork. And somebody else on that frequency will respond, and everybody in between that's not on that frequency, they just won't know it's there. So that's what this Zoom call is. Eventually, I'll get the video together. I tried it on my phone, but my phone wasn't doing the Zoom right. So I'm still on my PC, but I have the audio now. And probably by next week, I'll have the video together. So I'm just so grateful to everybody, and thank you for allowing me to see and hear you and your experiences, which are just expanding me so much.
Well, I could just say one thing, which is, since I'll be 90 and I'm qualified as being a post-teenager, I learned so much stuff from you that I never knew about and still learn. And then when you send me those fantastic tapes, I listen, I said, oh my goodness.
Well,
Those guys were so great, and they still sound so great. And there's so much information out there, and people can go on your program and on Jazz on the Tube and see and learn and hear stuff. And there's nobody in between saying, let's see if we can make this relevant by adding, subtracting, diluting, putrefying. None of that's there. It's all there just the way it is. And it's just as relevant as it will always be, because the thing of beauty, as John Keats so aptly said, is a joy forever.
Yeah, and I have a young lady who has sort of come toward me as she's writing her PhD. She's a beautiful writer, and she's writing her PhD on Earl Garner. And of course, Earl Garner is from Pittsburgh.
Mm.
And I had a chance, believe it or not, I had a chance to interview Earl one-on-one on public television in 1970. And I was with a band, and he got the keys to the city at our Carnegie Music Hall. And I said, Earl, why don't you come over to the studio, let me interview you? Because it always bugged me that whenever anybody mentions Earl Garner, the second sentence that comes out of their mouth is about how he never learned to read music.
Mm.
And to me, that's just an insult. And I say, you wouldn't say that to Art Tatum or Stevie Wonder or anybody who's blind. Why are you saying it about Earl? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, what does reading music have to do with making music? Music's a sound. It's not a sight. So I said to this young lady, I said, how do you listen to a drum solo? And she says, well, you said the first two words wrong. I said, your drum solo? So I said to her, okay, you're in music school getting a PhD. Tell me, because I didn't go to music school. I learned mine in the hangoutology, as David says. That's where I got it. And I said, do they emphasize in the jazz programs, and this is any program, do they emphasize listening or do they minimize listening? And she wrote me back, she said, minimize. I said, I rest my case. So what happens is people are not listening the way the people in the clubs and the after hours clubs, whether they were musicians or not, they listened at many, many deeper levels than the notes.
Mhm.
And so I said to her, there are so many levels of listening that you could learn to access that have nothing to do with the name of a note. And yet you go to music schools and you're talking about the name of a note, which means you're talking about sheet music. And when you're talking about sheet music, you're not talking about the music that we're talking about. You don't even think about notes when you're making the music. You don't even think about what you're playing. You might hear it back later, but you're thinking of it's a language.
Well,
And
that's-
very few musicologists talk about music as a language and all the dimensions that a language can have. And yet we learn our native language wherever we grow up by imitating our parents, right? And by the time we're 2 and 3, we can speak and communicate in whole sentences and everything with all the attitudes and emotions that we have access to. And when we turn into a teenager, people will say, you sound just like your mother, or you sound just like your father. But you don't sound like my mother or my father. You sound like your mother and your father. So that means what you picked up from listening, and be it correct or not, it's the dialect and the meaning from imitation. And I'm also a doctor of clinical psychology, so I can tell you that 99% of what all human beings learn is by imitation and not by intellect. And yet the intellect always wants to get in on the game. So um, when you start thinking about music as a language, then we turn our native language, we can speak pretty well before we learn how to read. But the first thing you do when you go to a music school is they you and point to a page and tell you that's music. And they don't tell you how to hear it. And you don't ever learn what it sounds like. So if you don't know what music sounds like, how can you appreciate it?
Well, there was a great Polish actor, and he used to recite the alphabet in Polish, and he was such a good actor. When he was done it, they said he could make people cry. And music's the same thing as a symphony composer. When you're putting this stuff down on paper, that's just the first step to hopefully inspire the people playing it, singing it, or conducting it to put something, make them feel something where they put their selves into it. And then the people who are listening to it hear and feel something that would never happen otherwise. And that's so, and I was on that thought, since the people who made the Lascaux cave paintings 25,000 years ago aren't available tonight because they have another gig, maybe we could ask Norton Wisdom, since he's here, and he already made I saw on the screen some gorgeous painting that he ended up making, a completed thing, and maybe he could say something about, as a visual artist, since as you noted from the book, Jack himself loved painting and did some himself because he wanted to be part of that world too. And he didn't say, I'm the world's greatest painter, I'm the next Picasso. He never said that as a writer. He just wanted to do that. And so, Norton, are you still there? Well, if anybody sees Norton, tell him.
Or if Robin's on. Can you
right.
unmic Norton? while we're waiting for Norton, may I ask something to Jim Canary, please? It's a story that you've told me. And when you went to the London Museum and you knew that the Diamond Sutra was in the same place as would be the scroll of On the Road, could you tell us about that a little bit?
Oh yeah. The Diamond Sutra is it's I think the oldest printed book that we have from. I think it must be maybe it's 8th century. I can't remember. I think it's 8th century, 768, something like that. But it was a huge inspiration to Jack because it extols the Buddhist ideas of emptiness and wisdom. And so I was going there to see it, and I was supposed to give the opening remarks, and I really wasn't sure what to say, but I sort of heard people talking and different languages. I saw the British Library up ahead, and I came back to a Tibetan saying that's Nangwa Tamche Milam Shindu, which is all appearances are like a dream. And it just appeared to me then, of course, this is the most beautiful dream ever for Jack to be there, as David pointed out, with the greatest writers that have ever been, and with this most holy sacred scripture, which had such an effect on his life. And so that's how I started the remarks, and that's all I had to say, really. Welcome everyone to the dream.
That's beautiful.
I believe we have Norton with us
Great.
now. Norton, why don't you go ahead and...
Well, I'm going to start off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, Jim, first of all, I tried to show, I'm going to start off with you, Jim, that, I'm going to start off with everybody you mentioned that's in the London Library. I think the last thing they expected or even wanted was to be in that library. I think everybody that you mentioned had no intention of anything outside of the now, at least as I know them. I had, I was raised by a guy named Manly P. Hall, who had kind of an interesting library with a lot of Shakespeare folios and stuff, and the humility of those authors would sort of dictate that the last thing they would expect and maybe want would be to be a commodity for people to gawk at. Anyway, but Jim, I'm going to go back to you. I tried to tell Pamela that in 1975, I was going through the hill tribes and we crossed into Burma, and I bought this Sanskrit sutras, and I took it home and painted on top of it as you know, as that's what I do. And I tried to find it, and I'm gonna if we have a second here, I'm gonna show you why I couldn't find it to send to you to make you angry at the problems with posterity. And I'm gonna turn on, if just a minute, you guys, I'm gonna turn on my light and show you why. Hang on. Hang on. See if I can do this here. This probably has nothing to do with anything. It's just I'm just amusing myself and being a pain in the ass. Let's see, how do I do this? Hang on here. Let's see. Oh, there we go.
When you're live, you never know what to expect, so it's all good.
Is there anything happening?
Yeah, there's some record albums.
Record albums? No, those aren't record albums.
Some art, some tools.
TV.
That's about how much modern tech some of us are there, Norton.
Hang on a second. Anyway, this is about most of my art. Probably have about another 5,000 paintings outside. Anyway, in there is some pretty interesting stuff that I bought in Burma in 1975. That if I can find them, I'd love for you to see them, Jim. But now I'm gonna finish off with a sort of, hang on one second here. Hang on.
I feel like we need to be playing some
Can you see my
background
screen?
music.
Maybe.
Can you see my screen? Oh, you know what? Exactly. You know what? If Dave could grab his horn, I think this would be perfect. Dave, you got a
Oh.
horn right there?
Yeah, can we
You
get
have
some
your
live music going
Yom
right now?
Kippur horn.
I actually have a Yom Kippur song, traditional song I could play on my Khalil, for those of you who are spreading that. And also, if I could say
then
one thing for the people who tuned in late, that gorgeous painting that you saw, the person, Norton Wisdom, who made that, I believe was making that while I was reading, and I said, wow, if you could even be part of his world, that's something else. So for those of you who are creative and say, nobody's interested, hang out with someone else that makes you feel like doing something, and maybe they can do something that will blow your mind. And that's what it's all about.
Hey, David, by the way, I have a ram's horn. So when I saw you play the ram's horn, I could have pulled mine out, but I'm in an apartment and it's kind of late, so I didn't. But I have one here, so muzzle top to you and everyone.
So I'm going to answer your question about what I think art is about.
Okay.
And David, if you could jump in, we could kick this can down the road. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I'll back you up discreetly, because when you're accompanying someone else, less is more. When in doubt, leave it out.
Well, that's what I think art's about.
That was
about,
terrific.
It's about subtraction.
Well, you know something, if I could say, Norton, if any viewers say, did you guys rehearse that? I can simply say, we've been rehearsing for years, but with other people. Therefore, if you pay attention and like minds and you have respect, you can't go wrong. And thank you. Norton. That was a great moment. Wow, look at that. Isn't that beautiful?
It's your fault. It's your fault. And don't run away from it.
No, it's great. We hope all
Love
the
you
people,
guys.
We hope all the people viewing, if you can't get together with Norton, because he goes all over the world, he's kind of a busy guy, to put it mildly, find someone in your community. You can go to a dry cleaning store and find a fantastic cellist or guitarist or a composer or a poet or a writer or a dancer or an actor or someone that wants to do all of those or is interested in doing something, and they have a day gig and they're told, you're washed up. Well, maybe you could say, you may be washed up in the minds of those who are professional put down artists telling everybody that they're washed up because they don't dig what they're doing, and that's their constitutional right to bum other people out. But why don't we get together and see if we could do something, even if it's just at a party or for ourselves, to make us feel good? And it's amazing what can happen and does happen all the time. And Jack, of all people, hung out with anybody and everybody, and that's why his writing is so human, because he did not stop being a human being. And all the years till he was 35 as what they would call a total zero, which is the way we were described at that time. When he got the only thing worse than obscurity being recognized, he didn't allow that to destroy him. And then when he got savaged and said he fell out of fashion, the worst crime you could commit in America, that didn't distract him. And he wrote up until the very last day that he left us.
You know, that spirit is so important. It's like Billy Strayhorn, who
Exactly.
he's also from Pittsburgh, and his family has an archive of over 11,000 pages of music that he did, most of which has never been heard. And he wrote on his deathbed in the hospital. He was always writing. So.
And you know, the thing, Nelson, I enjoyed was the story that when someone said, here's a kid and his teenager wrote one of the greatest songs in jazz, and Duke said, I'd like to meet him. So
Hush Life, yeah.
Duke invited him to the concert. And Duke afterwards said, well, how did you like the concert? He said, well, I think it was Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing. He said, Duke, he said, it was magnificent, but the way you played that, and then he named the bar number, it was different than the way I wrote it, and I think this is what you meant. And then he sat down at the piano, and Duke said, can you get on a plane tomorrow?
Right.
And spent the rest
Your
of his
sound
life.
just go away? Okay,
Does Murray have a question? Murray Weinstock, did you want to say something? Because you unmiked yourself, Murray.
Yeah.
Would you like to say something?
I did. I just think this is like an amazing night, and it's not a coincidence that the scroll and Yom Kippur are the same. It's happening on the same night. It's an auspicious time. And just to see that scroll is like spiritual. And wow, what a painter that guy is. I just love that. It's the whole night is thank you, David. It's a whole night of creativity. And one question I had, being a village guy who spent a lot of time at McDougal and Bleecker, where was Alan's house?
Well, he had many places, but he lives on the Lower East Side, I think right by the Alphabet City where I used to live. And I remember Dylan and I walked all the way over there in 1971 after he and Gregory gave a poetry reading. And it was on the second floor, I believe. And I'm not positive which street it was on, but I remember walking all the way from NYU over to his place and spending the whole night with him and Bob and deciding. Then Alan decided he was going to be a singer. And he was such a wonderful Blake scholar and such a good teacher and such a mentor to so many people. And he was so generous to Jack way back when Jack, as they said in the vernacular, couldn't get arrested. So I'm not sure the different places that we saw each other, which home it was that he had. He moved to a gorgeous place just before he passed away because he gave away all of his money when he would make any, which wasn't that often. And finally, when he got I think his archive was sold, he got a really nice place the last year. And then everybody came there to crash out or, or to get a handout or get something. And he was exceedingly generous to other people. That's a long-winded way of saying, I'm not sure of the address.
Like 91st something.
That's cool.
And Murray, in
Yeah,
case people don't remember, Murray Wanstock is a great pianist and also was with some of the real huge groups of which he was responsible for them sounding so good musically, and still plays up a storm all these years later. And we were at a festival of all people, and they couldn't believe someone who'd been doing it as long as him was so friendly to all the young singer-songwriters. Instead of saying, "Get out of my face, don't you know who I am?" He just sat there, listened, encouraged them, and played. And that was a beautiful thing that you got that spirit. And man,
thank
that's
you.
what it's about all year round.
Yeah, it's sharing creativity, if you get a chance.
Right. And it's more fun for for all the Zoomsters who are watching and people listening. It's more fun, and you have more fun. And when you're with people that are like that, they make you feel good. So it's good for your health not to be a nasty, narcissistic, egotistical swine, because that's an overcrowded field and a non-growth industry.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question. If James Canary, can we stay with you, the equally to be loved, equally becoming a Buddha, and make this beautiful wish for David for the new year and for Yom Kippur? And could you lead us in that, please?
Okay. So, David Amram, equally empty, equally to be loved, equally a coming Buddha. Thank you, David.
Thank the listeners and the great Charlie Chin, who Murray knew, who was one of my mentors, said, "David, I'm a devout Buddhist and a Maoist, so I'm always in conflict with myself." Something to think about. So there's no one perfect answer, but we all have to live within ourselves of the different conflicting things and understand other people also got some conflicting things and somehow get past that negativity and look for the beauty part. And when you do, you don't need a can opener to say hello or and you don't need a welcome mat to invite someone into your world. And they can also teach you a whole lot of stuff if they see that you're interested and respectful to them. That's just my little good Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur thought for everybody. And I'm going to fast. So for all the people who are not of the Hebraic persuasion, go out and have a big meal, get a second and third helping, and we'll be grateful to you that you can be feasting while we're fasting.
Thanks for the memories.
Well, with that, David, we have a couple of minutes until 8. So I see that Norton is now working on a new inspiration. How about we use this last couple of minutes to play us off into Yom Kippur?
Okay, I'll use, Pamela reminded me, I forgot last week to mention, this is a Chinese hulose. And when I heard it played in Chengdu, China, I said, whoa, some beautiful instrument. And this is for everybody. Hope to see you next week when we have Bill Morgan, the wonderful, wonderful poet, novelist, writer, master of archivism, and also someone who worked with Allen Ginsberg for almost 20 years and survived. And he's just terrific and so full of information and such a great gentleman and a great scholar. We're so happy he can come. And we'll have other guests each week too. And this is for all of you until next week. And thanks to Pamela and to Monsieur Anthony Desmarbier. If it weren't for these two people, none of us would have this beautiful evening. And thanks to James Airsay and to Jim Canary for being here and for the work, not just that you've done, but for the work that you do.
Great night, everybody. Tune in next week.